Do you know what I found to be hilarious watching Ohio State's spring game? There are people who would be pining for Urban Meyer to come back and to coach this team instead of Ryan Day. I mean, you just knew having Urban Meyer talking today and interviewing him that there are Ohio State fans who are pining in their mind or on social media or even to their fellow Buckeye fans or other college football fans, reminiscing about the days of Urban Meyer. And Urban produced great teams. He produced an elite team that won it all. And he's a legend for what he did at Florida and Ohio State. But when I say on my channel that I think that Ryan Day has built something better, or at least he's maintained that high standard that Urban put at Ohio State, I don't think I'm wrong. I watched great football today. And Ryan Day, yes, 1-3 record against Michigan. That's why so many of these players decided to return, where if they beat Michigan, they probably would have went off to the NFL, is they want to beat Michigan, they want to win the Big Ten, and they want to win a national championship. But make no mistake about it, Ryan Day is a near elite head coach who has made staff changes nearly every year or has had to deal with staff changes nearly every year. 11 games a year wins. That's the lowest amount of wins that he has ever had. And in this spring game, you saw a little bit of his offense with Chip Kelly managing it and implementing his own system back. I think the offense showed signs of hope today. And the defense didn't look bad at all. It looked elite in defending the pass, and it was a little disappointing in stopping the run, but I don't know if that's because Jim Knowles, with him still, I think, holding on to the conservative scheme that he used last year and the defensive line not being as strong as the secondary, I don't know if it's because the defense or because the offensive line in the run game has gotten better. And I feel like it is a mix of both. There's so much to talk about here, but I wanted to start out with that thought of mine about Urban Meyer and Ryan Day and how people criticize Day a lot. And some of it's warranted because the 1-3 record against Michigan, the losses to top 5 teams, the college football playoff record, and putting all of that into perspective with Ohio State's expectations, it's understandable why fans are frustrated with them. And then you look at games like Oregon in 2021 and Missouri last season, and you think that if Ohio State just came with a pulse, that they should have won those games. And indeed they should have, but they didn't. And the record in those games, the final score, certainly stands. But this team, in a sense, feels like how I viewed 2022 Alabama, or even 2022 Ohio State, or a little bit of 2023 Michigan, where the prior year they had a high ceiling, they had the necessary talent, the necessary coaching, and they had elite enough players and even whole position groups to win it all. And they didn't. Alabama in 2021 and Ohio State in 2021 went 13-2 and 11-2 respectively. Alabama lost to Texas A&M, and they lost to Georgia. And Ohio State lost to Oregon and Michigan. Those two teams that year could have easily matched up for the national championship or in the college football playoff. That could have been the national championship game, and Alabama could have won it, Ohio State could have won it, or Alabama could have beaten Georgia. But that didn't happen there, and they returned a lot of players the following season in hopes of winning it all. And they didn't. Alabama got worse, Ohio State got better, but still fell short. Michigan in 2022 goes 13-0, but they lose to TCU in one of probably the worst losses or the biggest upsets in a college football playoff semifinal game. They return a lot of their players, and they win it all the following year in 2023, going 15-0. This Ohio State team reminds me of those teams for the fact that they return a sizable amount of production. They don't return as much production as Michigan did last year. In fact, not even close. But they return a lot of starters, and they return enough key players and have the necessary depth to certainly compete for a national championship, and I think to be one of the favorites. And I had some questions entering the spring game. I wanted to see how the quarterbacks did, how the offensive line did. I wanted to see the linebacker position. Those were the main areas that I wanted to see. And I think the only appropriate place to start out is the defense. Now, the one area that I had questions about, and it was more so just in a general reason, not a negative question or a concern, was linebacker. I didn't see too much of linebacker. I saw more so secondary, some of the defensive ends getting after the multiple quarterbacks, whether it was Keenholz, who really struggled, or Sayin or Howard or Devin Brown. Sayin actually did show some mobility, but we'll get into that when we talk about the offensive side of the ball. All those teams that I just mentioned, 21 Ohio State and 21 Alabama and 2022 Michigan, they had defenses that, in the case of Alabama's, was great. In the case of Michigan's, was near elite. You could maybe say the same about Alabama's in 21 as well. Michigan's, you could maybe say, was elite in 22. Ohio State's in 21 had a great ceiling. Not an elite ceiling, though, and it just played on about an average, maybe above average basis for the Power 5, which is nowhere close to what Ohio State should be. This team's defense last year was better than all of those defenses that I mentioned. It was better than 2022 Michigan's defense and 21 and 20 and 21 Ohio State and Alabama's defenses. You didn't have a Will Anderson last year, but you had, as Jim Knowles and his Buckeye fans and his Buckeye coaches, a more cohesive unit, a unit that was the embodiment of bend but don't break, and they rarely broke. Rarely. There were a few games where they bled, and they bled for a while. I think the Notre Dame game and the Michigan game were examples of that. But they never fully broke. I mean, they gave the offense the opportunities necessary to win those games. This defense returns almost everyone that matters from last year, outside of Josh Proctor, Tommy Eichenberg, and Steel Chambers. They bring back everyone in the defensive line. Also, don't forget about Mike Hall. However, he was injured, and Larry Johnson loves to rotate on defense. Got to see a little bit of Tywone Malone, too, at defensive tackle. And the media spoke with Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, along with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, who the defensive ends had some funny questions about their head coach, but that's not really important. What was important is Sawyer saying that hopefully this year we can get it done against Michigan, against the Big Ten as a whole, and winning the conference and win the national championship. I don't know what to make of the hopefully. I'm not going to read too much into it because it is word choice. It could be him being humble, which is really good, or it could be him and, as a little bit of a result, the team lacking confidence. But we're not going to go into that. Take from that what you will. I thought that the secondary was elite. They had, I think, 3 interceptions, if I remember correctly. One against Sayin, one against Keenholz, and then they had another that was almost called out of bounds, but it was ruled an interception. I forget who that was against, but I think they had 3 interceptions, maybe 4, maybe 2, but around 3, and they had several passes defended, great coverage, particularly in the red zone. The corners, safeties, mostly played back, had no interest in getting torched. They never did. The only time that the defense got torched in the passing game was the linebackers creeping up in RPOs that Ryan Day was explaining to the media. And the run game, that was it. Those are the weaknesses, are the front, and that's no different from the defense last year. This secondary is the best in college football. And while the defensive front struggled in the run, they did get pressure, and I do think that this offensive line, by virtue of what they're bringing back and also what I saw in this spring game, has improved, at least a little bit. I don't know if it's a big enough jump to be a physical, elite, or even near elite or great offensive line, but I think it is going to make at least a minimal jump and have some improvement. And it was good to see, if you're a fan of defense and you think that Ohio State is going to be the strongest on the defensive side of the ball and you want them to be, it was good to see Sawyer within the first few plays, I think, get a sack, and then other defensive ends and defensive linemen and linebackers also getting pressure, making the quarterbacks uncomfortable. And it's also good for quarterbacks to get used to, because I don't think Ohio State has a Georgia caliber O-line of the past 3 years, an Oregon caliber O-line of the past 2, an Oregon State caliber O-line of the past 2, or a Michigan caliber O-line that we saw in the playoffs last year or in 2022 as a whole. I don't think Ohio State has that caliber of O-line this year. I don't even know if they have the ceiling, the potential to be that type of offensive line. But they do have some mobility at quarterback, which again we'll get to in a few minutes, few seconds here. The defense, great. I can't say enough about that. And whether it's Davison Igbinosun, whether it's Caleb Downs, whether it's Denzel Burke, whether it's, regardless of who it is, whether it's Jahad Carter or Jordan Hancock, Lathan Ransom didn't even play in the spring game, and they were still elite. Whether it's young players like Jermaine Matthews Jr., Malik Hartford, Calvin Simpson-Hunt, it doesn't matter. This secondary is the deepest in college football, and it has the highest ceiling players in college football. I'm a Michigan fan. Will Johnson could be the best defensive back in all of college football. He has a high ceiling. He is going to be a day one pick. So is Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs could be the best defensive back in all of college football. And he's going to be a true sophomore this year. He won't even be draft eligible. He'll have to come back for another season. Elite player. Denzel Burke, the day he stepped on campus, the year that he played, we saw in 2021 when he was a true freshman, he was awesome. It just came out, elite player. I think he was first team all Big Ten corner or second teamer in 2021. Great corner, phenomenal player. And Lathan Ransom has first team all Big Ten potential if he can stay healthy. I love the secondary. The defensive front needs to get better at stopping the run. That was certainly a problem in 2022, 2023, less of a problem, but long drives against Michigan were able to be sustained. The Wolverines were able to get a long drive in the end and run the football just well enough. Notre Dame had some success running the football, and Missouri, but that was mainly due to Ohio State's defense being on the field forever, was also able to run. Part of that is the fact that Ohio State likes to line up wide on the defensive line. Another part of that is gap integrity. They have new linebackers, C.J. Hicks, Sonny Styles, Tommy Eichenberg, Steel Chambers, who were great at stopping the run. They're gone. So I think in the run defense, gap integrity is going to be an area that needs to be focused on. But I liked what I saw from the defensive ends. Overall, the defense everywhere was great. The secondary was just that next step of elite. And I think the defense, as long as linebacker is figured out, I think it'll be better than last year's defense, which was pretty darn good. Before we continue, this is a great time to remind you to please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more Ohio State football content, Big Ten football content, when I go live, which will be weekly for the most part on Thursday nights with rare exception, and when I produce college football content as a whole, like top 25s or who I think are going to be All-Americans this season, like who are my All-Americans that I'm picking. Big 10, ACC, Big 12, SEC conference predictions, or just random videos about teams that I'm interested across the college football landscape. You are not going to want to miss some of the best college football content on YouTube here at College Football with Sam, and the best, I can say that for the Big Ten. We produce the best Big Ten football content on here at College Football with Sam. If you want to support this channel monetarily in an extra way outside of just subscribing and joining this awesome community, please check out my Patreon page and my merchandise store via the links in the description and in the pinned comment. And thank you to the Patreons listed on the screen for supporting the channel, for sponsoring this video, and also sponsoring the channel. You help me produce great work here. And lastly, there will be a giveaway at 20,000 subs. So if you don't know if you want to sub or hit that notification bell, you're going to want to do that because there will be a big giveaway for 20,000 subs, and we're trying to hit that before the 2024 season kicks off on August 24th. But without further ado, let's get back into it. You see Jeremiah Smith pictured here on your screen. Now, Jeremiah Smith wearing that number 4 true freshman. I think that he was the second best receiver on the field today. It was very impressive watching him always be open. And he tried to make some contested catches too, but he's just playing against an elite secondary with corners and safeties that no other school outside of maybe Georgia with Malachi Starks at safety or Michigan with Will Johnson at corner can compare to. Maybe Iowa's secondary can compare, but again, best secondary in college football in my mind, and at worst, it's top 5. And Jeremiah Smith was going against that unit, and he had success. Getting open, taking advantage of the soft coverage, and Emeka Egbuka with the one-handed catch and the second attempt at a one-handed catch that was it failed, but I think there was some interference there, and it's very hard to make those type of catches. I think Egbuka is clearly healthy. I think he is going to have a much better year this year than he did last year or even in 2022. He's not Marvin Harrison Jr., and Marvin Harrison Jr. was a unicorn, and he will be missed. But Egbuka, I was impressed with what he did. And I apologize for that typo on his name. That's whatever. It is what it is. Again, just like the quarterbacks who threw some interceptions and made some mistakes, I made a mistake right there. But Egbuka, I was impressed with what he did just in those few plays. And then Jeremiah Smith, I think he's going to start as a true freshman, be in that rotation. I loved seeing what he did today. The quarterback room was intriguing. It's definitely deeper than it was last year. I think that it even has a higher ceiling than it did last year, which is good. Howard looked good. He was more accurate than I expected him to be. Devin Brown looked healthy, accurate, definitely can scramble. Sayin had some up and down moments, but he has fast release. You can tell that he's still learning the system. Again, he's a true freshman. He doesn't have the experience edge in the system that Devin Brown does, or the age experience that Devin Brown and Will Howard do. But watching him with the amount of snaps that he took, the fact that toward the end of the game he was getting better and better, I do think he has the highest ceiling out of anyone in the room. And he's close. I thought that Howard had the best performance. Keenholz had the worst game. Sayin was close to Howard, and so was Devin Brown, but I wanted to mention Sayin in particular just because of how young he is. And you can tell that he's young even just by his build, I think. But going through spring practice, fall camp, and if he continues to progress, it wouldn't shock me if it might be Ohio State and Chip Kelly and Ryan Day's best decision to start him this year. It wouldn't really surprise me. I still think that Howard and Brown are in the lead, and maybe I'm wrong on that, but Sayin's definitely competing, and he's doing a better job than I think anyone expected of him, and it's really impressive who he is as a true freshman who transferred in from Alabama. And you can see why Nick Saban and his staff wanted him there. And I think it is, in fact, a big loss for Kalen DeBoer and his staff at Alabama that they couldn't hold on to him. Because Jalen Milroe has a high ceiling at Alabama, and if DeBoer and Sheridan can tap into his ceiling and tutor him and mentor him well, then he could be the nation's best quarterback. But that's a gamble for sure, given who he was at a high school and who he is as of what we know from last year in 2022. And Sayin right now definitely looks like someone who in the future, whether that's this year or in the years to come, is going to be an elite quarterback. Receivers are great. I got to see some of Will Kaczmarek making great catches. I do think that Ohio State at tight end with him, G. Scott Jr., and Jelani Thurman, they do have some upside, but they could use some more consistency at the position. The running backs, we know they're going to be good with Henderson and Judkins. You did not need to see that, or you didn't need to watch the spring game to know that Ohio State is going to have a loaded running back room. You did not need to watch the spring game to know that. The offensive line, I think, struggled in pass protection, and I forget, actually, let me pull up Ohio State's 2024 recruiting class. There is a true freshman who balled out at running back. He was wearing a red helmet with like the cushioning. Sam Williams Dixon, running back out of Pinkerton North, just a 3-star out of high school. He had the game of his life. Now, yes, spring game, but he impressed, showed power, showed fight, showed some speed. I think if he stays at Ohio State, I think that they'll reap the benefits of keeping him there. I think that he has a high ceiling at that position, especially for his grade coming out of high school. So some underrated depth at running back to pay attention to. The offensive line is the biggest question, I think, of this team right now after watching that spring game. How is it going to hold up against Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, and Derek Moore at Michigan? How will it hold up against Abdul Carter, Hakeem Biaman, Keziah Ezard, Danny Dennis Sutton at Penn State? How will it do against Oregon? Oregon brought in some players through the portal. They have Mateo Uyunglele and Jordan Birch at defensive end. How will the offensive line for Ohio State hold up against some of these better defensive lines that they will be playing in the Big Ten and also in the college football playoff? How will it hold up against a Georgia offensive line? Or I'm trying to think of some other teams here that should have, like Clemson. If Clemson is able to revive their offense and keep their defense playing at a high level, how will they do against a Clemson D-line that'll feature someone like Peter Woods or a linebacker who in a true freshman could be contributing in Sammy Brown, who's looked really good? Just as some examples and things to think about. Overall, though, I think this team's heading in the right direction. I think that this spring game was more encouraging and better than last year's spring game, which was lackluster in the passing game. The offensive line obviously struggled in last year's spring game. Defense totally dominated. This year it was more even. It was more back and forth. And seeing what the defense has returned and what the offense has returned, that's encouraging because both units, more likely than not, are going to stay the same or improve compared to what they were last year. And seeing the balance in the spring game, I think, confirms that these two sides of the ball are more on a similar level than they were this time last season, or at any point last season for that matter. The Buckeyes are 70th in returning production. They're second in preseason SP Plus ratings. They're projected to be one of the best teams in college football this year. And they looked the part today. They looked great. I think they can achieve all of their goals this fall. The secondary is, I think, the bread and butter of not just the defense, but potentially this entire team. They cover wide receivers incredibly well. They are disciplined. They're conservative, but they fight hard. They're hard-hitting, and there's nothing to dislike about the secondary. And if Lathan Ransom, hopefully he comes back soon and is healthy, but if he is healthy, the secondary is going to be even better than what we saw today. I think Ohio State's roster overall is set. I don't think they need to use the portal a ton or potentially at all this coming cycle that starts Monday, April 16th. But I think if they wanted to use the portal, they could use another tight end or an offensive lineman or two to just add competition and depth to that room. There could be similarities between last year's Michigan team and this year's Ohio State team. And that was actually brought up by Joel Klatt in the spring game. And at first I'm thinking, well, that might be ridiculous, especially since Michigan was top 5 in returning production, not 70th. And I think that last year's Michigan team, preseason in particular, had a much better look on the offensive line, better look at tight end, similar look at running back. I don't think you had the same high ceiling as Judkins and Henderson paired together do, but a similar overall look for college, better look at quarterback, and better look on defense. And I do think that last year's Michigan team, if we were to do hypotheticals, which is stupid but also fun, I do think last year's Michigan team would be better than this year's Ohio State team in the same way that they were better than last year's Ohio State team. But that's just my opinion, and it's in the preseason, so we really have no idea how that would pan out at all. And even when we watch this Ohio State team play in the fall, we still won't have a great idea because each season of college football, while overall similar, is a little different. And Ohio State hosts Michigan this time in the shoe, which is big. Michigan Stadium and Ohio Stadium are two of the most intimidating and greatest stadiums in all of college football. So in the game in particular, home field advantage matters a ton. But this Ohio State team does have a ceiling to them that is scary, for lack of a better term, or just for one word. They do have, I think, a greater level of toughness than they had in most other Ryan Day teams. They seem to have a desire to get after it. And last year you saw that defensively. And I think watching the spring game, this may now extend to the offensive side of the ball as well. So there are some similarities with last year's Michigan. Do you want to be exactly like last year's Michigan? Well, I would say yes, but I don't know if Ohio State fans or the staff want that to happen. Regardless, it's good to see that type of comparison, I think, coming from an analyst like Joel Klatt, and I can get behind it partially. So this team can absolutely win the national title, beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and I think they need to. I think this is a national championship or bust season for the Ohio State Buckeyes. If they don't win it all this year, or if they don't, lose on a last second or controversial play to someone in the national title, or maybe to Michigan, or maybe the Big Ten, but win everything else, achieve all their other goals, it would be an absolute failure of a season. And even that might be too graceful. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you to Crash2488 for sponsoring this video and channel as a Heisman member. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverter for sponsoring this video as an All-American member. And thanks to Will Loftus, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video as all conference members. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.